Good Wednesday to you, everybody in Calm 651. Welcome to week 4. How's everybody doing? Excuse me. Still the allergies, they plague me, but help is on the way. Oh, who do we have on the coffee cup today? Wyoming. A state near to my heart. Much loved by me. I'm a Westerner. I grew up out west. Spent a fair bit of time in Wyoming. Still enjoy going back though there. Don't care for the wind towers. Ugly. Very ugly. And if these, they're just like, they just go on for miles, these windmills, these giant industrial windmills. And if the power that they generated was being used by the good people of the state of Wyoming, I might be a little less bothered. But having grown up in Utah, in which we have a similar phenomenon, that is power plants that are built there for power that goes elsewhere. And where does this power go? You may be wondering. Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Diego, all goes west across the power grid. But I digress. Okay. Let's take a look at what we're going to do this week. And then let's look at what you did last week. And we'll take it from there. This week, we're going to start digging into, we'll do this for the next couple of weeks. We're going to start digging into how it is that you go, sort of the fundamentals that you go about PR research. And by that, we specifically mean statistical research. Now, I'm assuming that everybody has had a research methodology class, or if you haven't, you should have one sometime. Make sure that you get one, because if you're going to be in strategic communications, and if you're going to be in turn that fan off, if you're going to be in PR, you may or may not land in a research role in what you do. Okay. But you need to at least understand how the data that you'll be looking at, how it's generated, and where did it come from. Not the least of which, in terms of reasons, is you have to be able to spot monkey business. And next week, I'm going to give you a sort of an, if you want to, go ahead. If you don't worry about it. Assignment, give you a little chance for little extra points, which will give you an article that touches on how common it is for the results of quantitative or qualitative research to be misrepresented in the numbers. And look, when you when you break it down, a number is nothing more than an abstract symbol, and it's no more specific in its abstraction than a letter. If I can just find my Sharpie here, okay, and a little piece of paper. Okay, so if we go like this, or if we go like this, okay. Okay, so here we have the symbol we use to represent the number 2, and then here we have a symbol that we use to represent a specific sound. Okay, now in their initial forms, in the Arabic form, there was some correlation between the number of angles in the shape. In its initial Arabic form, and you still see this today in Arabic countries, 2 look much closer to what you associate with Z. See if I can get that to focus. There we go. Because there's 1, 2 angles, and so that was a representation of 2 items. Now, it's been absorbed into other cultures and stylized. There's nothing inherent in that form, the sort of a loopy curly form, that suggests you're referring to 2 things. Even more so in the case of that form right there, there's nothing inherent in that, in its shape, connected to the sound of or ah. They're abstractions. So numbers are symbolic abstractions, letters are symbolic abstractions, and the one is not more valid than the other. But we have this prejudice, this presumption in our heads that if it's a number, it must be truer than if it's words. So you may not wind up in a role in which you're generating the data. I mean, maybe you will. I actually encourage you to learn how to do quantitative research, because for most people, knowing how to work with numbers is like hocus pocus. It's like magic. They just don't understand it, and this gives you a tremendous advantage within the marketplace. But okay, but you go, yeah, I just don't have any aptitude for this. I can't do it. Okay, but you need to know at least how to interpret and how to ask the questions of data that you may be reviewing one day. All right. So if you haven't had a methodology class yet, don't worry. This part of the class doesn't assume that you do. I've given you an additional reading, additional to Stacks. So we're going to read chapter 4 in Stacks that will explain some of the components of statistical research, and we'll start with types of variables, and then we're going to work out from there. Okay. All right. You're going to be fine. Okay. Let's take a look at what you did last week and see if we can add anything in to what you said. And speaking of, and now in your discussion questions, speaking of discussion questions, I wanted to point out and make note that last week when I was reading through the questions and people's answers, specifically the one concerning the statement regarding ethics, that question. And I think, right off the top, I think it was question 3, if I remember, from last week, question 3, week 3, when I gave you the statement, the ethical statement from Scott, and I said, what do you think of this? I guess it was question 3, week 2. Okay. And I read Marcel's comments. And then I said, nope. And then I went into a lengthy discussion about what I was looking for. I want to make it very clear, and this is for everybody. When I pick your answer, all right, and often my longer explanation of what I'm looking at and looking for, I'm directing that at the text. I'm not directing that at you. Okay, now it may be that in terms of what you pulled out, you didn't get what I was looking for. And in this case, in the case of Marcel, it was not. Reading through her answer, it was pretty much what I want you to consider as a proper Christian response to the ethos of, well, there is no ethos, to the approach to ethics of relativism, which is causing a lot of problems throughout our business. And that's why I gave you the, little documentary about Edward Bernays. And I'm going to give you some other examples of that here in just a minute. And it's causing a lot of problems society-wise. So, I had a rather long discussion about that question. I want to make sure that you do not interpret that as a long discussion about what Marcel said or what any of you said. As I've noted before, excuse me, I do read all your discussion questions. I don't chime in with, no, you got that wrong. In fact, I don't chime in at all unless, there are 2 exceptions. Number one, if somebody's acting inappropriately and I need to say, hey, this isn't how we conduct ourselves in the discussion section. Or number 2, if somebody's so far out of the field in getting what the author is talking about, those responses are always private. I just email the individual directly. So I wanted to touch on that because, it came to my attention that I had, in the way I'd responded to that discussion question, it appeared as if I was responding to Marcel and specifically telling her that she didn't understand her own faith. And that was not my intention. So first of all, make sure that that's crystal clear. And then secondly, on a broader base, sort of a bigger topic, the bigger thing, when I explain what it is that we're looking for in the text, I'm addressing the text. I'm not dressing you down, okay, as participants. I am here to facilitate your professional development. That's my job. Now, yeah, I've been in this business for a long time. There are some sectors of this business that you likely have more expertise than I do. Okay, and that's great. I enjoy actually reading the experience that your expertise brings that comes out in the discussion in the papers. I find that very interesting. Excuse me. So I don't know everything about the business. Been in it a while, but so have you. So we're here developing professional skills as professionals. So I wanted to make sure that that was very, very clear. Okay, let's take a look at week 3. Okay, we're plunging into ethics again. We touched on it last week. According to Stacks, what are the 5 core principles of research and public relations ethics? Which of these 5 is frequently violated in current public relations and advertising market? And then I asked you to provide a link. Okay, so first of all, what we're looking for here is for you, to be able to recall these 5 core principles. So if you were asked about it, if you were asked, if there was a question that went something like, which of the following are not among the 5 core principles, or which of the following are the 5 core principles, you could go, okay, I remember reading according to Stacks, blah, blah, blah. All right, so that's the nugget here. And then, of course, for you to be able to understand it, you might be saying, well, you might get a question like, discuss this principle. What does it mean? How does it apply? Stuff like that. Okay. Madeline, you went last. Let's take you first. In the 3rd chapter of Stacks' book, he discusses that he, not him, and Bowen argued that 5 core principles of research ethics include intellectual honesty, fairness, dignity, disclosure, respect to all individuals in public relations research. Okay. Well, one example in the current public relations, jump down here, paragraph, in the current public relations advertising market, these ethical principles are challenged. I feel that today all of these principles are challenged or broken in PR advertising market. All of the principles connect to one another. So when one principle is broken, it can continue to break a chain of ethical principles. This can be dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so a bit of feedback. And again, now this is about method rather than maker. Okay, so I'm talking about how we go about this rather than you specifically, Madeline. Okay, so here's something I want you to be attentive to in your development of thinking and analysis. All right, we exist in a time in which it's commonplace. I was going to say fashionable, but that's not quite the word I'm looking for. To not rank order things, to say, well, either I just can't tell, or well, there's really no difference between this and that in regards to well constructed, not well constructed, beneficial, not beneficial, which is sort of like everything's sort of in the middle. Okay. Now again, this is not directed at you, person whose answer I just read. Okay, this is directed at a methodology rather than the method maker. Okay. Yes, things are rank order, and as strategic communications folks, you need to train your mind to start thinking in these terms, because first of all, material reality is a hierarchical construct. And I don't mean construct as in we made it up. It's constructed as hierarchy. We exist in highly dependent nested hierarchies. Forces within nature exist in hierarchy. And what do I mean by hierarchy? We have an aversion to that term because we assume it means that someone is better in some sort of a moral sense than someone else. And that's not what we mean. What we mean when we're speaking of researchers about hierarchy hierarchy of causation, for example, as you'll be looking at this week in your readings, is of, yes, the many factors that influence the phenomenon. If since we often cannot account for and deal with all of those factors simultaneously, we have to determine which one is most influential. So weather is an example, right? There are a lot of factors that go in to determining whether it's going to rain or not. Physical factors. But there are two that are of greatest importance. Number one is the atmospheric pressure. Number two is the moisture content in the air. Okay, you know, then there's temperature, there's wind, there's ground air temperature, ground temperature. These are other factors, but the two, if somebody said to you, well, what are the two most influential factors that we have to look at if we're going to determine whether it's going to rain? Those two are on the top, because a high pressure, all right, and a low pressure affects moisture in the air differently, and the level of moisture is affected differently. So get used to saying, in my considered opinion, if you're not exactly sure, so, and I'm not really super sure, say that one is one. Okay. Trinity, let's see what you said. Of these core principles, I can see disclosure being the one most frequently violated in current public relations and advertising environments, particularly in use of consumer data for targeted messaging. A good example is Facebook's data privacy violation that led to a $5 billion settlement with the Federal Trade Commission, where the company failed to adequately disclose how their user data was collected and shared with third parties. Okay, now Facebook's not necessarily in public relations, okay, but in terms of how they're talking with their customer base, okay, I'd accept that, including for advertising and political purposes. While users technically agreed to terms, there was a lack of clear disclosure, that undermined informed consent and public trust. Okay, good. See, when you sort of wrestle with these questions, and if you're not sure, you're going, I've never really thought about which of these 5 principles is being violated a lot. Well, okay, spend a little time cruising around the old the old web. Read up on an article or two. Okay, but remember, we exist in nested hierarchies. We're highly dependent creatures, and as such, we even intuitively, excuse me, my eyes are watering a little bit, allergies again. We even intuitively look for the hierarchy that we're nested in, and how we fit and how we move up or how we stay stable, and that gets projected out into the world. We're always looking for primary cause, the principal independent variable that's going to affect us as us being the dependent variable. And if those terms are foreign to you at this point, they'll resonate more. You'll understand them more after you read this week's reading. Question number 2. Consider the following quote from Scott. The plan for all research is to learn what has already been done by researchers and information from other industry-specific articles. Oh, you mean like you look it up and familiarize yourself with what others have to say? Where did I just hear that? Me. Briefly describe and discuss the research you are planning to use in completing your first PR presentation. Okay. Now, I wouldn't pull a question from this for a final, and I'm going to skip over this by way of the response in terms of reading it aloud, but I have read through your stuff. I'll tell you what surprised me about how the 3 groups. I'm sorry, my eyes are just like how the 3 groups broke out is that nobody picked the Immigrations, Customs, and Enforcement question or the Gavin Newsom question. I thought you would, I set them up on opposite sides of the political spectrum on purpose, but I thought it'd be interesting. I thought you would have been all over that. Anyway, let's go on. Question number 3. Okay, so this was from these last 2 questions was from the documentary Century of the Self. and I remember if it's part one or part two. I think it's part one. The whole series it was really well done. Now remember, when you put things in film form, okay, as a medium, film as a medium is, the guiding principle, that the outstanding characteristic is condensation. You have to squeeze a lot of stuff in there because, I mean, visually, we don't stare at things for 20 hours nonstop or something. Okay. So condensation goes hand in hand with simplification. So, when you see these things, um, pick up some of the books that are mentioned, some of the things that are the reference, some of the writings of some of the individuals that appear in the film, like Ewan, okay, and sort of, Stuart Ewan, just flesh it out. All right, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. All right, question number one. Excuse me. Question number three. Who was Edward Bernays? How does his approach to PR reflect or not the five core principles of research public relations? Ethics listed by Stack. This, if it sounds like a trick question, it's because it is. Okay. Let's see. How about Bob? Edward Bernays is what we'd call the public relations professional. That'd be one word for him. Bernays, uh, Bernays commentators portray him as a professional public relations counselor. Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew. I spent some time in Sigmund Freud's house, which is now Sigmund Freud Museum, recently. Very, very interesting. It's fascinating how, space relates to event. I should say house. It's an apartment. Two sides, and the totality of which was even the, you go up the stairs, and it's like the door on this side was an apartment that he rented, and the door on this side at the landing of the stairs was an apartment that he rented, and then they had the interior of the two altered, so there was a connecting passageway between the two sides, and he lived and worked on one side, and his daughter Anna lived and worked on the other, and very, very small, and spent most of the afternoon there reading. I've read a good bit of Freud's work, about how it is that he got started, what he did. What's my opinion of Freud? There was much that he pioneered, and set in motion that, things, I should say, pioneered in the secular world, because much of what he pioneered for the secular world was known and well established in the Christian worldview. So, for example, and we'll go back to the question here in just a second. Bear with me. So, example, when you're there in his apartment in the museum, there are a number of these sort of interactive displays where you can push a button and something lights up, or you push a button and it plays a recording. And one of the recordings that was played was a recording from Freud describing what he believed to be the essence, the heart of his technique in getting people to understand themselves so they could address issues that they were having with themselves. Okay, the perennial question: what's wrong with me? How do I fix it? And when you push this button, the recording from Freud of him recounting how it was, what it was that he focused on was, I brought people into my house, into my therapy room. We had one room dedicated for it with a couch. Give them a comfortable place to relax, the couch. They didn't have to look at me, so they could be anonymous. And then I just told them, just whisper your secrets. What is it that you've really done that you wish you hadn't, or you want to do that you wish you hadn't? What is it that terrifies you? Whisper your secrets. And I'm, and from the entire experience, I have a bit of a problem with fountain pens. I mean, in that I can't stop buying them. And for those of you who had me in some of my classes, you know this. I'm whispering my secret to you now. So I came out of the museum. Let's see if I can get that to focus with this very cool, and it actually works really nice. Fountain pen. Yeah, it says Professor Freud, room suites 3 and 4. But anyway, but I'm listening to this, Whisper Your Secrets, and I'm like, this is the history of Christianity for something like a millennium and a half. The use of confession, whether it's in the the original sense of group confession, because that's how sins were confessed, or in private confession, as in confessional, or even private, as in just praying by yourself. Christians have been doing this for like ever. So, Freud is groundbreaking in a time in which large chunks of Western culture have abandoned known benefits of the Christian approach to the world, and so to these large chunks of society, they're like, oh my word, we've never heard of anything like this. So Bernays is related to Freud. He's pulling on information from Freud that had been well known. This was not like, oh, new discovery. It might have been rediscovery by folks that forgot it. Okay. But let's go to Bernays, what he did, and did it reflect these 5 core principles? And I think Catherine Cinda, good to see you again. You hit this right on the nose. Regarding 5 core principles of research are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The 5 core principles of research, public relations, listed by Stacks, or intellectual fairness, honesty. So the Bernays approach PR did not reflect these principles. In the Happiness Machine video, Bernays' own daughter said he regularly referred to the masses and individuals, including his own family, as stupid. Yeah, and he plagiarized, and he lied. So, yeah, no, he had zero regard for principles. Okay. Question number 4. How did Edward Bernays persuade women to smoke? Was it ethical? What might be some of the reasons that women were discouraged from smoking more so than men? Okay. Most of you got, he played on their insecurities. He played on their desires within the context of social movement. That is the suffragette movement. And by the way, if you never have, go back and read some of the primary documents, and they're not hard to find. That is, articles and tracts and pamphlets and essays written by the suffragettes. It might surprise you to see that many of the counter arguments against women's suffrage were being offered by women, because bear in mind what they were talking about. Their focus was the right to vote on a federal level. There were many local levels, states, where women voted just like men. Wyoming was one of them, right? There was no distinction. The distinction was at the federal level. Why? Well, the prevailing idea was that the role of the federal government was significantly more limited than it is today. During the suffragette period from the late 18th and early 1900s, there was no federal income tax. There was nobody that thought that the federal government had the right to take money from the citizenry. That changed during the World Wars. Okay. There was foreign agreements, trade agreements, that the central function of the government at the federal level were those things. And then the deployment of troops and the allowance to draft citizens into the army, from which women were excluded. And so part of the rationale was, well, the central function doesn't impact this group. Why is this group weighing in on the decision of the central function. Now, I'm not defending that as a policy approach or not, but it's interesting to see how the history of what was going on has been rewritten. And it's easy for you to get sort of the more 360 view by just reading the works of the suffragettes themselves. Okay, but so, most of you got right these various elements that Bernays played on, their insecurities, there's political movements. I think, Ashley, you had a couple of really interesting illustrations about, how to, this pressure to stay thin and so on and so forth. But now, unless I miss something in one of your texts, and if I do, you send me an email. But all of you missed the central reason for women to the discouragement of women to smoke as opposed to men. It was not unknown that smoking caused health problems. Now, it was empirically established throughout the 1950s and 60s, and in ways that I don't know if it would quite fly today. It was established that the causal link between smoking and health problems, as specifically a rise in the occurrence of cancers and vascular disease. And the way they did this was, and I'm not advocating this. I'm just giving it to you. Is they took monkeys, strapped them down, and stuck masks over their face, on the ends of which they stuck cigarettes, and forced these monkeys to smoke all day long. And in fact, after a while, they found that nicotine as a substance was so addictive, they didn't have to strap the mask down, that the monkeys desired the nicotine. And they forced them to smoke, and they had this group of monkeys forced to smoke this many cigarettes a day, and this many cigarettes a day, and some none. And then they killed them, none meaning zero. They killed them and examined their organs, or tracked them over a period of time. Yeah, these hyper smoking monkeys over here are developing a lot of health problems of the following kind. Okay, this is how what was known was quantified, but it was not unknown that cigarettes cause serious health problems. One of the things emphasized by the National Socialist Party of Germany, the Nazis, was a prohibition against smoking and alcohol. That is, the government strongly discouraged people to smoke. And I'm not pitching the Nazi government as a good thing. That's not the point here. Okay. Because they understood, it was commonly known that smoking and drinking caused health problems. And for women specifically, it was commonly known that smoking caused problems with their children as they developed in utero. And there was I think we're seeing some sort of we're seeing some change now, re-evolution back to the awareness. I think some of the gender ideology wars have pushed this out into the forefront, that there's not a person on this that walks the face of the earth that didn't get here by passing through a woman. Now, it's funny, because when you mention that, people automatically assume that you're being reductive and saying, well, women equals having children, and then there's nothing in between. No, that's not the point at all. But the point is one of the central functions of this gender is the propagation of the next generation. And they knew that women who smoked had babies that weren't healthy and didn't live. And as a society, especially as a society that was tremendously human labor dependent, okay, that the advent of the machine to do a lot of what people used to do by way of labor hadn't gotten in there yet. Most of the population prior to 1920 was agrarian. it was about 1920 in the United States where that tipped, that more people were living in cities than they were living in the country, living and farming. And farming was tremendously human and animal labor intensive. You just needed a lot of people to pick the crops and to harness up the animals and to man the equipment. You did not have mass mechanization. And so a society looking at itself saying, if we're going to be here tomorrow, we've got to have a lot of people producing food. And if the people that are being born are sickly and they don't live, this leads to a reduction in the people producing food. That's probably a bad thing. So there were a lot of specific prohibitions of behavior applied to women by women that revolved around some of the specifics of health that resulted from the behavior, and smoking was one of them. Okay. All right. So unfortunately, the legacy of Edward Bernays remains. It's part of our business. It's sort of how the whole thing got its start, which is, not something praiseworthy. And it lingers around today. I'm going to mention a few books. I'm recommending your awareness of these books. I mean, whether you read them or not, okay, you read them as part of your awareness. I do not recommend, in the case of two of these, that this is anything that you internalize. So this sort of, this is how you get the stupid masses and everybody else to do what you want approach to human behavior is not gone. Edward Bernays is gone. His book Propaganda is worth reading because he just lays it out. He's very forthright. This is how we're going to get everybody to do what we want. But the sort of update and the repackaging of that persists, and among a number of authors in which it persists. One of the ones that has sold the most and is top in that field is this guy, Robert Greene, with an E on the end, Greene. The 48 Laws of Power, got a weird reflection on that. And in this book, and then his companion book, The Art of Seduction, and yes, there's a sexualizing of human relations. He's not just talking about men persuading women to do what they want, but a lot of it is that. But it focuses on how you get everybody to do what you want using sexual politics. But his first book, The 48 Laws of Power. Let me just go to the table of contents. Okay. Law number 1, never outshine the master. Law number 2, never put too much trust in your friends. Learn how to use your enemies. Law number 3, conceal your intentions. Law number 4, always say less than necessary. Law number 5, so much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life. Law number 6, court attention at all costs. Law number 7, get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit, and so on and so on and so on. It's unsettling to me how cynical this author is. And I shouldn't say, cynical authors are unsettling, and those are a dime a dozen. What's unsettling to me are the praises and endorsements of this book that you find in the beginning. From all sorts of folks in the business and technical world about how Robert Greene is just a genius. More applicable to our business, okay, are works by this guy, Robert Cialdini. Now, this is a book that I do recommend that you get, The Influence, Science, and Practice. And then the companion, and he sort of wrote that book, and then he wrote this one as a prequel, Persuasion. Okay, because in this one he tracks the language of human behavior and what leads to compliance and what not. And Cialdini is a curiosity to me because he goes through some what really can't be called anything else but manipulation. And he says, well, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but this is how people behave, and understand that it's out there. And it's sort of like, yeah, you sure you don't actually do that? But in this book that he wrote after that one, he said, well, even before you get to the persuade people part, there are things that you should be doing to prime the pump, to make them more amenable to persuasion. Those books are worth your time because they're well researched and they're well considered. And there's at least the attempt to sort of balance an ethos. Okay. And then finally, you saw just a little blurb, a little cameo by this author, Stuart Ewan, in The Century of the Self. Okay. This is a great book, PR, A Social History of Spin. And in it, Ewan tracks, how this stuff got started. He starts with Bernays. In fact, that's chapter 1, visiting Edward Bernays, and the not so glorious beginnings of this business, and then moves all the way through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, because this was written in 1996. Okay, very good book and a really engaging read. Ewan is a terrific author. Okay, everybody, keep working on those projects due on the 13th. So you got about less than a week. All right. Good work. Okay. If you have any questions about, some of you have been emailing me about your group, that's fine. And, I'm here for you during my office hours, and I think about you and I pray about you. Sorry for running a little long today. And I will see you on Canvas. God bless.